Chapter 2121. Waylon consoled. "You're doing great." They went downstairs together and saw the butler walking in with a chicken in his hand. Daisy was curious. "What's the occasion?" The butler didn't speak, but Cameron walked in from outside and said in a loud voice, "There's no occasion. Wayne is hurt, and I heard that chicken helps." Daisy smiled. "You're so nice to him." Cameron sounded casual. "I'm nice to everyone." Daisy didn't know what to say. Was she overthinking? In the evening, Cameron, Daisy, and Waylon had chicken soup for dinner, which smelled delicious. Cameron handed the chicken soup to Waylon. "The chicken has contributed its life and essence to you, so you should have more of it." Waylon smiled. "Thanks." Daisy looked at them while she bit down on her fork, but before she said anything, Cameron handed her a bowl. "You've been through a lot in the past 2 days, so you should drink more." "Too." Daisy forced a smile. "Thanks." She thought there was no need to bet because Sunny must have overthought. There was no way to force Cameron and Waylon together, so it was best to let things develop naturally. Cameron was getting a chicken piece when her fork clashed with another fork. She looked up, and it was Waylon's. Waylon didn't think that she would be going for the same piece, so when they both withdrew their forks, they said, "Go ahead." The air froze for a second, and then Cameron took the piece. "You're being too courteous." Waylon smiled and didn't reply. Daisy looked at them suspiciously because she sensed that something felt off after they returned. Did something happen between them? After that, she was sure that it wouldn't be surprising even if something had happened when they were alone in the woods. 2 days later. Cameron sat in the chair, slicing up an apple. Sunny was reading the newspaper when he read that Waylon was injured and suddenly asked, "Are Wayne's injuries bad?" She paused but didn't look up. "It's fine. His ARM still works." She remembered something and raised her brows. "Why do you care so much about him?" He was old and injured as badly as he was, so why was he caring more about Waylon? Sunny laid the newspaper down on one side. "Why can't I care about him? He was hurt because he was with you. If you had to fight those people by yourself, do you think you could have survived? The men had guns. Even if she was the best fighter in the world, would she be able to fight against bullets?" Cameron sighed. "Sure, you're right." Sunny scoffed. "You should treat him nicer." She was very serious. "I've made chicken soup for him. Isn't that nice enough?" He turned away and said, "You're not the one who made it." Cameron placed the sliced apple on the plate and was very curious. "Dad, am I really your biological kid?" Sunny angrily rolled his eyes and ignored her. She was his own flesh and blood, but she was so. "Dim Mahina knocked." "Sir." Cameron got up and walked out with her. They stood in the corridor while Mahina told her about the serpents. After the news that Jokin was still alive and was almost murdered by Manuel spread, the serpents had an internal dispute because some people were against Manuel being the leader. Chapter 2122. Cameron said with a hand under her chin, "Was it Mateo and his men?" Mahina nodded. "Mateo is Jokin's trusted aide, and Jokin trusts him fully." After news of Jokin's murder surfaced, he was fine with Florence taking over, but after Manuel took over, he started suspecting him. Cameron smiled. Now that Jokin is still alive and Manuel was the one who tried to murder him, there's no way that Mateo is going to let it slide. Mahina pressed her lips together and said in a serious tone, "He won't, but Manuel has killed the people who spread the rumor. Now, most of the people in the gang don't dare go against him. So even if Mateo is planning a coup, the men might not follow him." Cameron didn't speak. That was human nature. When people's lives were not at stake, they could just suspect and rise up against anyone. However, when Manuel killed someone to set an example, they knew where they stood. Thus, there was no harm in following the orders of whoever the leader was. Most people were afraid of dying, and no one would want to stick out, but as long as someone took action and succeeded, they would stand on that side. They didn't need Jokin to be their leader. They would just follow whoever the leader was. Cameron squinted and laughed. That's great. Mahina was surprised. Why would you say that? Having all that power isn't necessarily a good thing for Manuel. Cameron turned to face Mahina. Fabio doesn't care who the leader of the serpents is as long as they obey him. Even if that person was the leader of the serpents, they still had to listen to him, so what if Manuel starts disobeying? Mahina immediately understood. Fabio wouldn't let the serpents overstep. Exactly. Cameron smiled. So, all we need to do is give them a push. Cameron. Daisy's voice came from behind. They both turned and saw her walking over with Waylon. Mahina nodded. Mr. Goldman, Miss Vanderbilt. Cameron raised her eyebrows. What are you here for? Daisy held up the supplements. We're here to visit Mr. Southern Sr. She then opened the door of the room. When Sonny saw them, he was delighted. Daisy and Wayne are here. You don't need to bring anything. She smiled. Waylon helped me pick these out. Sonny couldn't stop smiling. Put them down there. We're a family. Thanks for the gifts. Cameron, who stood at the door, crossed her arms. She squinted when she heard family. She didn't know that her family and the Goldman were now one. Mahina suddenly looked toward Cameron and Waylon, then at Sonny and how he cared a lot for the Goldman siblings. She suddenly understood. She whispered to Cameron, I'm going to leave. Cameron nodded, and Mahina left. The room was filled with Sonny's laughter as if Daisy and Waylon's visit was a joyful occasion. Cameron stood at the door. She had never seen her father so happy, even when he was making a big fortune. She looked at Waylon. Why does my father love you two so much? Chapter 2123. Waylon turned to look at her. Why do you ask that? Cameron looked helpless. He always has a smile plastered on his face ever since you came over. Even Nolace doesn't receive this treatment. Waylon smiled. I guess it's our fault. Cameron thought for a while and leaned closer to him. Are you going to acquire the Southern clan? Why else would her father think of them as family? Waylon looked at how serious she looked and couldn't help but smile. What do you think? The rolled-up newspaper hit her foot, and she looked up at Sonny. You keep making your own assumptions. There's no acquisition. Do you think money falls from the sky? Acquisitions don't happen so easily. Cameron picked up the newspaper. How you treat them is so different. Sonny smirked and looked proud. She just couldn't understand. Fine, I'll leave then. She gave the paper to Waylon, then turned and left. Daisy was going to go after her, but Sonny stopped her. Willie, go speak to that kid. How could she suspect us? Daisy was rendered speechless. She understood what the old man was trying to do. Waylon looked at Sonny, nodded, and left. Daisy looked worried. Is that a little over the board? Cameron didn't know what was on his mind. What if she misunderstood? How would they explain it? Sonny picked up the flask. Do you think the girl is angry? She's not such a petty person. Daisy sat down. How would you know? She's my daughter. Of course I know. Sonny slowly drank his water and continued. Cameron has always been by my side her entire life. I can't keep her on the island forever. I've thought about it. After everything has ended, even if her identity hasn't been exposed, I will do it myself. All parents hope their children will stay close to them, but everyone hopes that their children are happy. If she had to stay on the island by sacrificing her happiness, I wouldn't want that. Daisy was stunned and looked down. Cameron walked to the car and was going to open the door when she saw someone walking over through the reflection on the window. She turned around. Why are you here? He said, he's worried about you. Cameron smiled. He doesn't seem like someone who would worry about me. Waylon squinted. Sonny hadn't said he was worried, but that didn't mean that he didn't care about this daughter of his. He doesn't have to say it. She crossed her arms. You're not his son, so how do you know what he thinks? He raised his eyebrows. Are you his son then? Cameron rested her elbow on the top of the car. I am playing the part. He smiled. But you're not a man. You're being a sexist. You're putting words in my mouth. When a man on a bike rode past, Waylon dodged it, leaned forward, and quickly supported himself by slamming his hand on the car door. Cameron leaned back on the door and looked up at him. There was less than half an inch in between them. A mother and son walked out of the hospital, and the son pointed at them. Mom, the two men there are kissing. Shoo. Look away. The mother covered his mouth and guided him away quickly. Chapter 2124. Cameron blinked. Her brain snapped back, and she pushed Waylon away. You startled me. She didn't notice and hit his arm, which made him wince. Cameron extended her hand to grab him. Did I hit your wound? Let me see. She then proceeded to take off his clothes. Waylon grabbed her hand. I'm fine. Let me take a look. If you're bleeding again, we'll go back and ask them to redo your bandages. Cameron rambled on while Waylon gripped her wrist and took a deep breath. Are you sure this is the best place to take off my clothes? Cameron paused and looked back toward the entrance of the hospital. Everyone was looking at them with weird expressions. To them, one of the men was trying to remove the clothing of the other one. Was that appropriate? More importantly, Waylon's shirt started creasing, and since he was trying to stop her, it looked like he was being sexually harassed. She let go of him, but wasn't done with it. She dragged him into the hospital. I'll check in the consultation room. In the room. Waylon removed his shirt, and the doctor removed the gauze on his arm and was shocked. How did you get this wound? Cameron leaned against the door. Gunshot. The bullet has been removed, and the wound was cleaned previously. The doctor looked at her. He should still be rushed to the hospital. Cameron looked away and mumbled, I couldn't at that time. The doctor shook his head. You know how chaotic the island can get. You, young people, should try to stay put. Look how long you've been hurt. It's even infected now. Even if it was cleaned previously, you still need to come to the hospital to get it checked. Cameron looked at Waylon in shock. Have you been cleaning your wound ever since we got back? She had assumed that Waylon would come to the hospital to get it checked, and she hadn't been paying attention. He didn't speak, which showed that that was true. Cameron turned her face away. I'm glad I dragged you here, or your arm might just be disabled. Waylon laughed. The doctor cleaned the wound again, applied some medication, told him what to pay attention to, and gave him the bill. Waylon slowly put his shirt back on and didn't mind that Cameron was there. Cameron looked away uneasily. Had he always had such a great body? After the doctor gave him the receipt, he took it, said thanks, and left. Cameron pretended to be checking the time. Waylon saw how red her ears were and chuckled. You were trying to take off my shirt downstairs, but now you're shy? Cameron was stunned and subconsciously touched her ears. Waylon smiled even wider when he saw how awkward she was. She grabbed Waylon by the collar. Enough nonsense. Waylon looked down at her and raised his brows. The doctor's pen dropped to the floor, and he was shocked because he heard something unexpected. Cameron let go and left. After they walked away, the doctor took a deep breath. That was Mr. Southern? That's why he hasn't married yet. He's gay. He was glad he didn't make it obvious, or he might have to say goodbye to his job. It wasn't easy being a doctor on this island. A few days after Sonny removed his stitching, he was discharged. To avoid another accident, the cars that went to fetch him were anti-collision and bulletproof. Mahina, who sat in the passenger's seat, turned around. Sir, we've secretly gotten Joaquin Serrano. We have enough care workers to take care of him, so Manuel won't be able to get to him anytime soon. Chapter 2125. Sunny nodded. That's fine. What about Mateo? Mahina replied. I've informed Mateo. He's loyal to Jokin, so he won't ignore anything that involves him. Sunny raised his brows. What about Cam? Mahina hesitated, but it was best not to hide it. She went to see Mr. Puzo. Meanwhile, when Fabio heard that Cameron tried to meet him, he squinted. Before he could reply, someone next to him sounded very careful. Mr. Southern is as cunning as his old man. He probably wants to meet you to talk about the serpents. They had caught wind that Jokin was still alive, but they didn't care whether Manuel was the one who tried to kill him. Now that the serpents were under them, the Southern clan would have to meet them to talk about this. Fabio took a drag of his cigarette. After a long pause, he crushed the bud in the ashtray. Where is he? He's at Parkin. Cameron sat in the main hall of the Parkin Chamber of Commerce. Everyone there had their guards up and stood in 2 rows. When Fabio walked in, Buchanan immediately walked toward him. Mr. Puzo, he suddenly came in with his men. We. Fabio raised his hand to cut him off and asked them to leave him. Cameron picked up his teacup and watched while Fabio walked over. Fabio sat down on the couch across from her and asked, How's Sonny? Cameron smiled. Thanks for your concern. He's healthy. Fabio said, I heard that he was injured recently. I'm glad he's fine. She looked around. You seem to care a lot about my father. He smiled and said, he's the leader of the Southern clan. Of course I have to pay attention. One of the men brought a kettle over. Fabio picked up his teacup and slowly took a sip. I wonder why you're here. She went straight to the point. I'm sure you've heard Jokin Serrano is still alive. Fabio smirked and continued to drink the tea. The serpents all thought that Jokin was dead. I'm glad to know that he's found alive. Cameron knew if he really was happy. It was a fact that the serpents were now part of his gang. Even if Jokin wanted to return to the serpents, it would depend on his approval. Fabio wasn't going to let the gang go easily. He hadn't done anything yet so far, but knew a lot about what was going on in the Southern clan. It meant that he had been observing from afar for a while already. The bigger the problem between the serpents and the Southern clan was, the better for him. It didn't matter how Manuel wanted to take down the Southern clan. Even if it wasn't done in his own way, Fabio would quietly allow it. Cameron placed down her teacup and looked calm. Don't you worry? Now that the serpents are part of your gang, they're no longer our concern. We don't need to waste our effort on a disloyal dog. Fabio frowned and raised his brows at her, but didn't say anything. She leaned back in her chair in a more comfortable position. I came here to talk about Manuel. Fabio placed his cup down. Did you come to my place to ask me to hand him over? He knew Manuel had hired killers from the Skull Club to kill Cameron and knew everything he had done recently, so he was aware of what Cameron meant. Chapter 2126. Cameron caressed her watch and chuckled. Do you really think Manuel will be loyal to you? Fabio replied matter-of-factly, I don't know if he'll be loyal to me or not, but one thing I'm very sure of is that he doesn't have the guts to do anything wild in my place. Yeah, you're right. After all, if he dares to do anything wild, you won't be using him anymore. Fabio frowned as he seemed to be mulling over her sentence. Cameron's smile deepened as she continued. A subordinate who suddenly gained the power to govern over an organization. Initially, he's supposed to serve you, but we don't even know who he's serving. After all, I'm pretty sure that you're not the one who instructed him to do what he's doing, right, Mr. Puzo? Her words were sharp, and the atmosphere froze. There was dead silence in the hall, and nobody dared to make even the slightest noise. Fabio took a sip from his tea as his face sank. It was only now that he realized how good Cameron was at talking. She had a sharp tongue and could always hit the bullseye. It was true that he was not the one who had instructed Manuel to do those things. He had only agreed to Manuel taking over the serpents because Florence would only cause trouble and ruin his plans. After Manuel took over the serpents, he began to unleash a series of attacks on the Southern clan. He allowed Manuel to do so because he was in need of someone who could keep the Southern clan occupied. After all, it was not a bad thing to him if Manuel could keep the Southern clan busy. All he had to do was observe from the sidelines and then strike at the right moment. This would save him a lot of time and effort. However, after listening to what Cameron said, he couldn't help but begin to think about his plans again. "You're really good at sowing discord, Mr. Southern." Cameron knew that he wouldn't believe her that easily, but she was confident that he must have started to doubt Manuel. She smiled and replied, "I don't have to do that at all. It depends on you whether you choose to believe me or not. If you don't believe in me, there's nothing I can do either." She slowly rose to her feet and added, "Mr. Puzo, people always say that those who watch the fire from the side will get burned as well, so you'd better be careful. Also, when the serpents were still in charge of the commune, they took a sum of money from us. If Manuel is willing to give the money to you, that means he's completely loyal to you. After all, I also would like to find out how loyal Manuel can be." Cameron left with her men after she finished speaking. Buchanan's face sank as he hissed, "How dare this brat sow discord between you and the serpents? Are you sure that he's sowing discord?" Fabio glanced at him. Buchanan stammered and asked, Is he not?" Fabio put his cup on the table and said, "Doesn't he know I will check? Besides, he wouldn't have come to me unprepared if he didn't have some information on his hands." Cameron was confident that he would look into it after what she said. After Cameron left the Parkin Chamber of Commerce, she went to Yuzu Villa. Damien was waiting for her at Yuzu Villa with snacks and tea. When he saw her, he said, "Your father was worried sick when he learned that you went to see Mr. Puzo at the Parkin Chamber of Commerce." Playing with the cup, Cameron said, "He told you about it?" Damien chuckled. "Yeah, he's worried about you, so he asked me to send someone to keep an eye on you from the outside of the Parkin Chamber of Commerce." She placed her hand on her forehead. "No wonder I had a feeling that someone was watching me when I came out." Damien poured a cup of tea and continued helplessly. "You're your father's only son, so you shouldn't make him worry about you so much." The corner of her lips twitched as she put the cup down. "He's the one who keeps making me worry. He's in his 505, yet he still has the guts to fight with other people. See, so he's in the hospital now. If he had told her about Jochen earlier, Manuel wouldn't have had the chance to ambush them." Damien chuckled, "All right, let's not talk about this. It's almost time for you to get a wife. I think the pretty little girl who came to the restaurant to pack some snacks today is quite a good match for you." Chapter 2127. Cameron was stunned. "Daisy? She was here to pack some snacks just now?" When Damien realized that Cameron was not into Daisy, his face sank. "Cam, tell me honestly, do you not like women?" He had been a friend of Sunny since Cameron was a kid. In other words, he was the one who watched Cameron grow up and treated him like he was his nephew. Cameron was stunned. "What makes you think that?" Damien picked up the cup and replied, "There have been rumors going around here lately, and all of them are saying that you're into men." She rose to her feet and asked, "Who started the rumors?" Damien said helplessly, "I heard it from a little bird. They said you were being touchy with Mr. Goldman in front of the hospital. Plus, you don't have any girlfriend at your age, so you can't blame people for being suspicious of your gender orientation. If you really don't like women, then Sunny won't have any descendants." Sunny had only one son, and if he was homosexual, then there would be no one to continue their lineage. Cameron was rendered speechless. She did not know that these rumors were spread from the Southern clan. Meanwhile, at the commune, Jack brought Daisy to the office. Daisy knocked on the door and entered the room after getting permission. Nolace was reading a document. He thought it was Jake and asked, "Anything?" She tiptoed to the desk and put the snacks she had bought from the restaurant on the desk. Knowles lifted his head and was stunned. "Daisy?" Jack turned around and left the room for them. She chuckled, "I know you're busy, but I won't disturb you. I just came here to deliver you some food." Knowles put down the document in his hand and rose to his feet. He walked around the desk and stretched his arm to grab her into his embrace. He buried his head in her hair and asked, "How did you know that I'm hungry?" "You haven't eaten anything?" she asked. "Yeah," he replied. He put his chin on her shoulder and continued in a husky voice. "I haven't eaten anything since morning." Daisy dragged him to the couch and forced him to sit down. "What? Do you know that's bad for your stomach? Now, I want you to drop what you're doing and eat first." He chuckled. Looking at the snacks that she brought him, he picked one up and popped it into his mouth. "It tastes good." Daisy sat at the side and watched as he ate the snacks. "I bought these snacks from Yuzu Villa. They taste good, right?" He raised his eyebrows and asked, "What made you suddenly want to come and visit me?" Daisy sat up straight and replied, "Why? I can't come to visit you?" She almost wanted to say that she missed him a lot. She turned her head around to look at the document on the desk and asked, "Nolly, I thought the matter regarding the commune was over. Why are you still staying here then?" Knowles was just taking over the commune temporarily. He was not the real person in charge of the commune. After the matter of the serpents was resolved, he did not need to stay in the commune anymore, but he must have his own reason for staying back. He lifted his eyelid and chuckled. "I'm just helping Mr. Southern Sr. to solve some of the issues." Daisy did not believe him at all. However, she could more or less guess the reason he was staying here. He wanted to stay in the commune because if he wanted to get rid of Donald, he must keep himself hidden. Staying with the Southern would attract too much attention, and people might get suspicious as well if they realized that Daisy was staying with the Southern too. Donald was in the dark, so Knowles had to stay in the dark as well, even if Donald suspected that he was still alive. Knowles leaned forward and placed his hand on top of hers. His voice was low as he said, "Don't worry." She withdrew her hand in anger and turned around. Knowles walked up to her, grabbed her shoulder, and turned her around to face him. "Please don't be angry. I promise you that I won't risk my life anymore." Chapter 2128. Daisy turned her head away. "I don't believe you." Knowles chuckled deeply and grabbed her into his arms. Before she could do anything, his warm and wet lips claimed hers. Daisy placed her hands on his shoulders, trying to push him away, but to no avail. They kissed for a long while, and he only released her after she nearly suffocated. Daisy pushed him away in anger. "Knowles!" He fell onto the couch, bringing Daisy along with him. He chuckled and coiled his arms around her waist to secure her tightly in his embrace. "I promise you, this will be the last time." Daisy looked fixedly at his face. There was a serious expression sitting on his face as she said, "If you lie to me again, I'll find another husband." Even though she tried to make herself look angry, he felt she was adorable. He couldn't help himself and grabbed her into his arms. As he chuckled, he said, "Do you need me to introduce someone to you?" She raised her eyebrows and asked, "Really? Remember to introduce a few more to me so that I can pick the best one from them." Knowles pinched her cheek. "Are you serious?" Daisy pushed his hand away and turned her head sideways. He sat up and secured her in his arms. "Can you stay and keep me company?" Something flickered across her eyes as she smiled beamingly. "You want me to stay?" Daisy sat on top of him and leaned forward. She slid her hand into his shirt in a flirtatious manner, and Knowles shuddered. He grabbed her hand, and a hint of desire rose from his eyes. "Stop it." She ignored him and landed a kiss on his Adam's apple. Something inside of him snapped, and he lifted her onto his body, holding the back of her head and pressing his lips over hers. Daisy pushed him onto the couch and ripped off his belt. Knowles chuckled and said, "What are you, Before he could finish his sentence, Daisy retreated with his belt in his hand. It was only now that he realized what Daisy was trying to do. He stretched his arm forward, trying to catch her, but to no avail. She took a few quick steps back and hopped to the door. Turning her head around, she giggled at him and said, "Humph. This is what you get for making me angry. Come and get me if you can." Nolace was rendered speechless as he watched Daisy run away with his belt. He placed his face in his hand and took a deep breath. He was caught between laughter and tears. It seemed to him that Daisy had become a lot smarter behind his back. Meanwhile, at the Southwest District Clubhouse, Fabio was lying on the bed with his eyes closed. He was not wearing any clothes, and there was only a bath towel wrapped around his waist. A female masser rubbed some essential oil on his back and began massaging. Gail lifted the curtain and walked into the private room. "Mr. Puzo." Fabio did not open his eyes as he replied, "What have you found?" Gail lifted her eyelids and replied, "It's true that Manuel has been contacting someone behind your back." When Fabio heard what she said, he opened his eyes and turned to look at her. "Who is it?" Gail replied emotionlessly, "It's someone called Donald." Fabio suddenly sat right up, and the woman behind him had no other choice but to retreat to the side. His expression was dark as he asked, "Donald?" He seemed to have heard the name before. He thought for a while and remembered that Donald was the escaped prisoner who came to join him on Eastern Islands 2 years ago. He looked at Gail and asked, "Are you certain that he's the one Manuel has been contacting?" Gail lowered her head and replied, "I wasn't sure initially, but Donald is staying in Irissa Hotel, and Manuel has been going in and out of Irissa Hotel several times. Moreover, I heard that the Southern Clan has confirmed that Manuel made the money transfers in the accounts of the commune. Even Jokin doesn't know about it, so it has to be Manuel who has used the money behind everyone's back. As for whether or not Manuel gave the money to Donald, we just need to find out if Manuel can spit out the money. This way, we can also find out whether he's working with Donald in secret or not." Fabio let out a chuckle, and a glint crossed his eyes. "Go get Manuel for me." Meanwhile, when Manuel heard that Fabio was looking for him, he thought that Fabio had finally noticed him. If he wanted to completely take control over the serpents, he needed help from Fabio. He followed Gail to the clubhouse confidently and stepped into the private room. Chapter 2129. Fabio sat on the sofa in his bathrobe and put his arm around the blonde beauty beside him. The beauty was nestled in his arms, smiling at him obediently. Manuel walked forward and lowered his head. "Mr. Puzo." Fabio lifted the glass on the table in front of him and nudged at the beauty. As the beauty poured wine into the glass, he asked, "I heard that you secretly took the money from the commune's account into your own pocket?" Manuel was stunned. Even Jokin did not know that he had taken the money, so how would Fabio know about it? As Fabio took a sip from the glass of wine, he lifted his eyes to look at him grimly. "It seems like Cameron wasn't lying at all. You indeed have taken the money." Manuel felt a chill down his spine. He did not expect Cameron to realize the missing money on the commune's account at all. Damn it. Why does he have to get in my way every time? "Mr. Puzo, it's true that I took the money." He did not dare to lie to Fabio. Mustering up courage, he said, "But I took the money for you, Mr. Puzo." Fabio squinted. "For me?" Jokin was afraid of Mr. Southern Sr., so he rejected your offer again and again. I think he didn't have any intention of forming an alliance with you at all. If I hadn't killed Jokin, the serpents wouldn't have defected to you. I intended to release the serpents from the Southern Clan's control, so I took the money from the commune's account to make Mr. Southern Sr. suspect Jokin and to sow discord between them. It's just that I didn't expect that Mr. Southern Sr. didn't take the bait at all. He spoke with indignation as if everything he had done was to lead the serpents to defect to Fabio, bring down the Southern Clan, and sever the relationship between Jokin and Sunny. Swirling the wine glass in his hand, Fabio fell silent for a while before smiling. If that's the case, thank you then. Manuel smiled back at him. I'm willing to do anything as long as I can help you, Mr. Puzo. So that means the money is in your hands now, right? Manuel's smile froze. Fabio put the glass on the table and looked at him fixedly. Since you said you did it for me, then how about you help me to fill in the amount of money that Parkin Chamber of Commerce lost because of Mr. Peralta? Manuel clenched his fists tightly and forced a smile on his face. Of course, I can. Bah, but I need some time to get the money. I'll give you 3 days. After that, Fabio left with the blonde beauty in his arms, leaving Manuel alone behind in the private room. Fabio did not need the money at all. He was just testing him for his loyalty. He would never allow anyone who worked under him to be loyal to anyone else besides him. If Manuel couldn't get the money out in the next 3 days, then he would be in big trouble. The next day, at the Southern residence, Sunny was playing chess with Daisy in the courtyard. Daisy looked around and leaned forward. Mr. Southern Sr., are you the one who spread the rumors? She had heard the rumors about Cameron when she went to the training center this morning. Sunny chuckled. What do you think? It's a nice move, isn't it? The corner of Daisy's lips twitched. Yeah, that's a hell of a move. What are you guys talking about? When Cameron came out of her room, she saw that her father was mumbling something to Daisy. Daisy grinned at her and replied, we're talking about chess. Sunny suddenly smacked her hand away and said, how can you checkmate me again? Can't you show me some mercy? Chapter 2130. Daisy replied in a serious voice, no way. The first rule in chess is that we must go all out regardless of who we're playing with. If you lose, you lose. Cameron crossed her arms in front of her chest and said, Dad, just admit that you're not as good as her. Stop bullying a little girl. Cameron sighed. There's no one to continue my bloodline. Is there anything worse than that? Daisy couldn't help herself and laughed. Cameron then said with a straight face, you talk as if I can really help you to pass on your lineage. Sunny picked up a cup of tea and sighed. But how are you going to explain it this time? She did not want to waste her time with him, so she said, all right, let's stop that. I have something to discuss with you. Sunny became serious and asked, what is it about? Daisy knew she shouldn't stay here, so she rose to her feet and said, then I'll go back to my room first. Cameron sat on Daisy's seat and filled him with everything she had said to Fabio yesterday. After Sunny listened to what she said, he asked calmly, so you want him to help you get rid of Manuel? We can get rid of Manuel and lure the person behind him out. Isn't this the best way? He frowned. Manuel can't escape anymore, but I'm worried that the person behind him may not take the bait. Cameron was stunned. You know the person behind him? Sunny nodded and said, it's Donald. A hint of surprise crossed Cameron's eyes as she exclaimed, isn't he the person who Nolace has been looking for? It was never in her wildest dream that the person behind Manuel's back would be him. Sunny slowly rose to his feet and walked to the side. Nolace is the one who noticed the problem with the account book. He has long suspected that someone in the Serpents is working with Donald. I think it's Donald who instigated Manuel to take over the Serpents from Florence. He turned his head around to look at Cameron and continued. What Donald needs is a pawn who can get Fabio's attention, and this pawn is none other than Manuel. Even if you want to get to Donald through Fabio, Donald won't give in that easily. Not to mention that he's hiding in the dark. We don't know when he'll return fire. Cameron chuckled, maybe. He was the one who ordered those people to hunt Waylon and me down at that time. Sunny was stunned. He suddenly remembered that Nolace had told him before that there were 2 groups of people that day. One of the groups was going for Daisy. They were from. The Serpents had not brought any weapons with them since they wanted to capture her alive. However, Cameron and Waylon had been facing a group of outlaws. In other words, Manuel had not been trying to distract them. Instead, Manuel and Donald had made a move at the same time. Donald wanted Manuel to capture Daisy so that he could use her to lure out Nolace. As for Cameron, He wanted to get rid of her to throw the Southern clan into turmoil as well as to help Manuel capture Fabio's attention. It was a good plan that killed two birds with one stone. Manuel came to the Irissa Hotel to discuss with Donald what they should do next. After Manuel left, Buchanan from the Parkin Chamber of Commerce came to him. Donald invited Buchanan to the restaurant. Buchanan went straight to the point and said, "Mr. Puzo wanted me to ask you if you have been in contact with Manuel in secret." Smilingly, he replied, "Why would Mr. Puzo think that? I've only met with Manuel from the Serpents a few times. We've never talked to each other much. Since you've defected to Mr. Puzo, I suggest you drop all your fantasies. Mr. Puzo knows everything you did in Yaramore, and he wants me to send you a message. You're in the Eastern Islands now, so you need to follow the rules of the islands. With your intelligence and tactics, if you can't be used for Mr. Puzo, then he won't keep you. I hope you can understand this, Mr. Matthews." After he finished speaking, he left with his men without waiting for a reply from Donald. Donald's face sank from the moment Manuel looked for him. He knew that Fabio had started to suspect him.